Right then, in this video we take a detailed look at the new Kone NMX14 Ecodisc. This motor is really nice. But let's first start off with the history. So back in the older MX era, Kone had these motors. There's the MX06, which is the base model Ecodisc, which should take around 600 kilograms at 1 meter a second. You then had the MX10, which had the higher capacity of 1000 kilograms, and you had the MX20, which had the higher capacity of 2000 kilograms, or you could have it with a reduced capacity and a much faster speed. The MX20 could go up to 2.5 meters a second. As well as these classic motors from the MX series, there's also two rare motors. There is the MX10 brackets 16, which is a faster version of the MX10, and it had the same brake sound as the MX20. This is the MX10 that sounds like an MX20. Listen to the sound. Also had the MX20 Lite, which had roughly the same spec as the MX10 bracket 16. So then, let's now move on to the new NMX era. Kone updated all of their motors and improved them. You have the NMX07, which is a replacement for the MX06. Kone have completely redesigned the motor. They took everything about the MX06 and improved it, updated it, made it much better, and it's a really epic motor. Then you have the NMX11, which is a replacement for the MX10. This motor is very similar to the NMX07, but it's been made bigger, and they've massively increased the power from the MX10, because the NMX11 can go 1.75 meters a second and has a capacity of 1150 kilograms. Then there is the MX20 updated version. Now the MX20 didn't have a full replacement unlike the other motors. This is because the MX20 was a very well designed motor, and if you look at the design and look at the metalwork, it's very well structurally supported and actually has similar structural support to the new NMX motors, meaning that the MX20 didn't need replacing because they simply got it right first time. But what they did is they made an updated version where they increased the power, and the new improved MX20 motor can go 3 meters a second, a very fast speed for an MRL. But the motor we're going to be looking at today in this video is the NMX14, which is the replacement for the MX10 bracket 16 and the MX20 Lite. So the NMX14 is a halfway motor between the NMX11 and the MX20 improved version. The lift in this video has a capacity of 1150 kilograms and runs at a speed of 2 meters a second. So very much a halfway spec between the NMX11 and the MX20 improved version. So then, if we take a look at this new motor, this is what it looks like. Notice that this is a very well designed and very well structurally supported motor, and it has very similar design features to the NMX11, but it looks quite a bit different. Now, one thing that is really noticeably different on this motor is the brakes. Because on the older MX motors, the brakes went on the side of the motor and sort of snapped on with a loud clunk sound. Then on the NMX motors, the brakes are still on the side of the motor, but have a more traditional looking brake with large brake pads to soften the sound. But the NMX14 is different. It's got disc brakes! The first ever Ecodisc with disc brakes. Notice that the brakes invert on the side of the motor are actually grabbing onto the motor. Notice you've got the unpainted ridge around the outside where the brakes snap on, just like a disc brake on a bike. Also, one other thing about this motor is the name, because in some parts of Kone's website they refer to this motor as the NX14, despite the fact if you look at the design it's clearly in the NMX era. I'm not really sure why, but there's actually a sticker on this motor and the sticker says NMX14, which is a far better name for a motor since it clearly is an NMX motor, and from now on this is what I'll refer to the motor as. So then the next thing I want to talk about is how well built this lift is. And this lift is built very well. This is a very heavy duty and well built lift. The only criticisms I'd have of this lift are the general criticisms I'd have of MRLs that applies to all MRLs. For example, the whole weight of the lift is suspended on the lift tracks, which is a flaw of all MRLs, not exclusive to this lift. And apart from that, I have no criticisms. This is a very well designed lift. And let's take a look at a lift car, and it's got a nice chassis. Now on the base model Ecodisc, the NMX07, there is no chassis. And that's a bit cheap really. Even though the NMX07 is a really good motor, the lift car's a bit cheap. And as for the NMX11, there's two versions of this. Some of the lift cars do have a chassis, but a lot of them don't. And they run at 1.75 meters a second with without a chassis, that is unacceptably cheap. Like NMX11s without a chassis actually wobble their way up the lift shaft and go up 1.75 meters a second, a far too fast a speed to not have a chassis. But the NMX14 always has a chassis, so a much better lift. Its lift, even though it's a lesser spec than the MX20, is as well structurally designed as the MX20. The NMX14 is a very good lift. Right then, let's now ride this lift. And let's now surf the lift. And now, this lift luckily has LCE logic, a really well designed lift logic that is absolutely excellent. It doesn't have the stupid new KCE. I do not know why Kone have got a new design of lift logic, because the LCE was perfect. If something's perfect, there's no point in replacing it, and KCE is quite crap. Plus, everyone knows how to maintain LCE, it's been going on a long time. If you get a lift with KCE, it's got a lot more proprietary restrictions, and you're going to have less freedom of maintenance choice, since most little generic companies won't be very familiar with it. and as this is a very modern LC, it's actually got the same bypass functions as the KCE. So let's now demonstrate these bypass functions. The purpose of the bypass functions is to make it easier for engineers to bypass the lift. And the reason for that is so that engineers don't have to manually bypass the lift and then forget their bypasses are in and run the lift bypassed, which is very dangerous. So Kone have decided it's much better to make bypassing easier with buttons, but then lock out the lift when the bypass is on. That way engineers will never have to manually bypass it, which means that it won't be the human error of engineers forgetting to take the bypass out when they're finished. Let's now demonstrate bypassing for safety on this lift. Also, notice that an alarm sounds when doing this to warn engineers that a lift's running bypassed and could crush them.